Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is ATIKAH binti JABRI and my matrix number was 2022-879-326. Now, I will continue this presentation for the introduction part. The United States and the Soviet Union, the two superpowers, engaged in a geopolitical struggle known as the Cold War that lasted for several decades. While having its roots in Europe, it had a significant influence on many other regions of the world, including East Asia. The Korean Peninsula, where the nation was split into North and South Korea after World War II, was one of the major flashpoints of the Cold War in East Asia. This struggle has lasted for decades, although North and South Korean hostilities have varied throughout time. The current state is particularly unstable. The pursuit of nuclear weapons by North Korean dictatorship has sparked a serious crisis that might have disastrous repercussions not just for the Korean Peninsula but the whole region and the entire globe. Despite attempts by numerous entities to diplomatically settle the problem, it has not been done so and is still a cause of worry for world stability. In this context, it is essential to comprehend the dynamics and history of the Cold War in East Asia in order to comprehend the current situation and identify a way to a peaceful conclusion. The Cold War and Korea split into two distinct nations following World War II are the causes of the current dilemma on the Korean Peninsula. There have been times of tension between North Korea and the outside world, but this time is different because of the regime's unpredictable conduct and swiftly developing nuclear weapons. The crisis effects have been felt in a variety of ways. In addition to the immediate danger presented by North Korea's nuclear weapons development, there is also the chance that an error in judgment or a breakdown in communication might result in hostilities. The likelihood of violence is further increased by the deployment of American military personnel in the area and by the tight cooperation between the US and South Korea. Economic restrictions have been also imposed on North Korea as a result of the crisis, which have had a considerable negative impact on both the nation's already precarious economy and the lives of its citizens. Considering how dire things are, there are still some causes for optimism. Many actors have been engaged in continuous diplomatic attempts to find a peaceful way to resolve the problem. The first meeting between a North Korean leader and a sitting US president took place in 2018 when the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met with Donald Trump. Although the outcomes of this discussion were conflicting, it did mark a step towards more open communication between the two parties. Moreover, regional actors including South Korea, China, and Russia have made an attempt to communicate with North Korea and find a peaceful solution to the problem. Due to the isolationist attitudes and erratic actions of the North Korean dictatorship, these attempts have been difficult, but they do provide some hope for a way to peace.
Hello, my name is HANISAH and I will be presenting about the main factor Cold War between North Korea and South Korea. For the first point, the causes of the conflict that occurred was the nuclear testing that was carried out by North Korea, which provoked South Korea's reaction to the threat of nuclear. North Korean nuclear weapons have become a new problem for South Korea. Although South Korea has been assured of military assistance by the US, should North Korea attack South Korea, but the guarantee of peace will not guarantee the peace of South Korea because North Korea can use its nuclear weapon at any time. For the next point is because of the existence of different ideological competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. South Korea is under the influence of the US with liberal capitalist ideology, while North Korea is under the influence of the Soviet Union, which developed social communist ideology, while the Soviet Union established the Democratic People's Republic Korea. In North Korea, with the capital is Pyongyang, led by Kim Il-sung. The lack of agreement between the US and the Soviet Union on the formation of an independent Korea is what ultimately triggered the Korean War. Last but not least, is another factor that causes the Cold War between North Korea and South Korea is the UN General Assembly certified the report of the South Korea election result in December 1948, which is another reason specifically for the Cold War. The South Korea government was declared to be the only legitimate government by the Assembly. North Korea expressed its ire at South Korea and the US as a result of the decision, feeling that the North Korea feeling that the UN did not acknowledge its right between them and the South Korea. Now I will explain about the actor involved in the Cold War between South Korea and North Korea. Okay, for the first point is Communist China and the Soviet Union supported North Korea. With the assistance of the Soviet Union, North Korea force invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950 by causing the 38th peril. The United States pushed the United Nations to take action right away. As a result of the Soviet Union recent boycott and decision to abstain, the UN Security Council was able to adopt this measure. Furthermore, North Korea became a communist state, whereas a pro-Western government was established in the South. China's intervention in the war event was essential for the outcome of the war because the Chinese support meant a shift in the power structure. Although China and North Korea were incapable of achieving their objective and to expel the US force from the south, they could successfully resist the attack and were able to prevent an entire US invasion in the north. Okay, the next one is the West and the United Kingdom and the US support by the United Nations supported South Korea. The United Nations or UN had been created in a critical period in history where its mission of keeping of the thing and international cooperation had the potential to keep the Cold War from going hot. The United Nations issued resolution on June 25 and June 27 calling for a talk and requesting that all members act South Korea. The resolution and declaration of war was not pushed for by President Trump. Instead, he saw the Korean conflict as police action, directed by the UN and sanctioned by the Security Council. In August 1950, British troops arrived in the Busan and were sent straight into battle with other UN forces who had been holding their position and launched a counterattack. General MacArthur, the commander of the UN, ordered an amphibious landing at Incheon, a part halfway up the Korean Peninsula on September 15, 1950. This enabled UN forces to advance quickly in the night during the fall campaign in 1950, approaching the Chinese border by November. That's all for me. Thank you.
Now, let's move to the part of related theory. According to the case study, the related theory was realism. Did you guys know what is the meaning of realism? In the context of the division of the Korean Peninsula, realism is a theoretical position that places a strong emphasis on the significance of security, power, and self-interest in international affairs. Realists contend that the primary motivation underlying nation-state behavior is the desire of power and security, and that nation-states primarily seek to safeguard their own interests. To put it simply, A realist approach to the conflict of the Korean Peninsula will emphasize the influence of power and security on how the various actors involved behave and would see diplomatic efforts and negotiation as instruments to further their own interests rather than as display of goodwill or cooperation. There are a lot of there are a lot of assumptions that might be made in light of the provided case study. The first one is the politics of the Cold War. The Cold War politics between the United States and the Soviet Union were the primary causes of the separation of the Korean Peninsula. The presumption is that North Korea's development as a communist state and South Korea's emergence as a pro-Western state democracy were caused by the geopolitical competition between these two heavyweights. According to the presumption, in the 1950 to 1953, Korean War was the relevant topic or the issue. The United States and other Western nations supported South Korea throughout the Korean War. A significant struggle between North and South Korea, the conflicts between communism and democracy throughout the Cold Conflict led to the Korean Peninsula being divided as a result of the conflict. Along with the loss of millions of life and the ongoing hostility between North and South Korea, the war had a profound influence on the area. Other than that, the nationalism and identity. Two separate states with differing governmental structures, cultural tradition, and identities have been formed as a result of the division of the Korean Peninsula. It is believed that the split has caused individuals on both sides of the border to develop strong patriotic views, which might make reunion challenging. The sunshine policy is the issue that this supposition is linked to. In the late of 1990s and early of 2000s, South Korea adopted a program of engagement and collaboration with North Korea known as the Sunshine Program. The goal of the strategy was to ease tensions on the peninsula and encourage communication and reapproachment between the two Koreas. The idea behind the strategy was that increasing economic and cultural interaction would foster mutual understanding and finally pave the path for reunion. However, the strategy eventually fell short of its goal and tensions between North and South Korea remained high. The Sunshine's policy failure demonstrated the difficulties in resolving nationalism and identity in the context of Korean Peninsula's division. In addition, the economic disparities. North and South Korea now have different economic fortunes as a result of the Korean Peninsula separation. It is believed that increasing economic integration and growth will help to ease tension between the two Koreas and advance reunification. The Kaesong Industrial Complex was the relevant issue for this point. A combined North and South Korea's economic development initiative called the Kaesong Industrial Complex was started in 2004. North Korean laborers were employed by South Korean businesses to manage the North Korean-owned complex, with the idea that economic growth may aid in promoting peace and reunification. The initiative was considered as a viable model for economic cooperation and integration between the two Koreas. The project was abandoned in 2016, however, as a result of hostilities between the two Koreas, underscoring the difficulties in attaining economic integration is the setting of the division of the Korean Peninsula. Last but not least, the nuclear weapons. North Korea's development of nuclear weapons is a result of the split of the Korean Peninsula. The presumption is that the presence of nuclear weapons poses a serious danger to regional peace and stability that may result in a nuclear war. The Korean nuclear program was a relevant issue, an important cause of stress on the Korean Peninsula and in the international world has been North Korea's nuclear program. North Korea conducted 3 nuclear tests and worked on long-range ballistic missiles as a part of a program that started in the 1980s and has since continued to grow. The nuclear program in North Korea is thought to be an attempt to prevent outside interference and keep the government in place, but it has also resulted in tougher international sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The problem of North Korea's nuclear program brings to light the difficulties in resolving the nuclear weapons issue in light of the division of the Korean Peninsula, as well as the possible dangers and repercussions of the nuclear confrontation. That's all from me. Thank you. I will pass this presentation to the next presenter.
So one of the impacts of the Cold War is that conflicts have also arisen as a result of ideological differences. The clash of capitalism and communist ideologies around the world resulted in numerous conflicts of major international significance in addition to dividing nations into two camps. The Berlin Crisis in 1961 and the Cuban Crisis in 1962 were a couple of them. On November 10, 1958, Soviet Premier Nikita delivered a speech in which he demanded that the Western powers of the United States, Great Britain, and France pull their forces out of the West Berlin within 6 months. The Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 was a direct and dangerous confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War and was the moment when the two superpowers come closest to nuclear conflict. So next is the Space Wars. Space battles and the race for technology turned violent. The space race was a 20th century competition between two Cold War adversaries, the Soviet Union and the United States, to achieve superior spaceflight capability. It had its origin in the ballistic missile-based nuclear arms race between the two nations following World War II. The United States and the Soviet Union financially invested in promoting math and science. These investments supported the nuclear and military technology and arms race between the two global powers. The space race brought pioneering launches of artificial satellites, robotic space probes to the Moon, Venus, and Mars, and human spaceflight in low Earth orbit and ultimately to the Moon. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the Earth's first artificial satellites. The successful launch came as a shock to experts and citizens in the United States, who had hoped that the United States would accomplish this scientific advancement first. So the last one for the impacts of the Cold War is the competition for arms affected global politics. This was an intensified scramble for arms as people compete to own more weapons. The pursuit of nuclear weapons accelerated the production of arms. In order to secure vital positions, both parties desired expanding their military infrastructure and intelligence networks globally. Soviet and American military alliance projected strength and offered security to states with their partnerships. The United States created and led the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is known as NATO. NATO is a security alliance of 30 countries from North America, Europe, formed in 1949. NATO's fundamental goal is to safeguard two allies' freedom and security by political and military. NATO remains the principal security instrument of the transatlantic community and expression of its common democratic values. So moving to the next one, the number one lesson is that conflict prevention efforts do make a difference. This is a huge lesson learned. By preventing actual conflict during the war, what could have been millions of lives lost were saved. The United States seems to struggle with this idea nowadays, but this idea could really be ingrained in American foreign policy. Every idea matters and needs to be considered. So next one is the Cold War. Next lesson of the Cold War is that friends and allies matters. The United States called upon and led a grand alliance against the Soviet Union through such instruments as the Marshall Plan, NATO, the Current Policy Action, and Euro missiles. The special relationship with Great Britain and the multi-phase region doctrine. In contrast, the Soviet Union was never able to command true loyalty from the Warsaw Pact, nations or the people within the Soviet Union. Other than that, the history of the Cold War can be written through the biographies of leaders on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Leadership matters. It began with each side of leaders who helped end the Cold War by abandoning the Brezhnev doctrine. And that doctrine, which held that Moscow would allow no communist state to become non-communist. It had been prop of the Soviet regimes for decades.
Big thank you to the previous presenter. My name is NORALYA FARISYA BINTI FAUDZI, and now I'll proceed with the next part, which is suggestions on how to stop war and bring peace. Experts in international relations and political science frequently recommend diplomacy and armaments control as ways to avoid conflict. Regardless of the precise methods used, suffice it to say that diplomacy and weapons control will always be crucial methods for preventing conflict. Next, we can make the world more peaceful by practicing inner peace. There won't be any more conflicts when all countries are at peace. Possessing a peaceful attitude can aid in the settlement of disputes between nations or countries, because in the event of a dispute between two nations, their leaders should meet to discuss the differences and possible peaceful solutions rather than resorting to force. However, if the leaders are not at peace with themselves, it will be impossible for them to resolve the differences without resorting to violence, which would result in war. For example, maintaining a relation of brotherhood and peace between the nations. Moreover, peace education. People who get positive peace education are better equipped to understand their rights, live healthy, fulfilling lives, and support the peace process for a more peaceful world. Today's interrelated global challenges call for a more comprehensive strategy to solve them. In order to improve conflict prevention, the United Nations is working to better understand how these issues are connected and how they might be tackled together. Education is an important factor, and there are many ways to learn about peace building and inequality, such as celebrating World Days. Additionally, education helps prevent prejudice, promotes democracy and peace, also increases community resilience to natural catastrophes and climate change. We may also educate ourselves on the factors that lead to civil war and bloodshed, the importance of non-violence and respect for other people. Last but not least is, if two nations do not seem to agree at any point, intervention of a third nation or UN, which is United Nations, could resist war. The United Nations has frequently been requested to stop conflicts from turning into war, to assist in restoring peace once an armed conflict has begun, and to encourage long-lasting peace in communities that have just finished a war. The United Nations strives to guarantee that space is utilized for peaceful purposes and that all nations share in the advantages of space activity. It's clear that United Nations intervention in solving the problem between North Korea and South Korea during the Cold War. To be concluded, the Korean War comes to an end with the United States, the People's Republic of China, North Korea and South Korea agreed to an armistice, ending 3 violent and frustrating years of conflict. The ceasefire put an end to America's initial task of a limited war theory popular throughout the Cold War. The Cold War expanded after the Korean War, with superpower involvement spreading beyond Europe towards throughout Asia. The US has already shown that it was prepared to step in when communism endangered non-communist republics throughout the globe. In addition to being worldwide, the conflict got worse as military budget rose. Well, that's all from us. Thank you.